sort of twist. Typically this form right here doesn't just start from only free forming, although it can, but it typically doesn't. Like some people usually start out with a sponge rub and then eventually their hair will get to this point. And with how much separation he actually has, especially with his hair type being around a 4B or a 4C, that's a lot of separation, especially for the hair type. Because if he was going completely freeform, there'd be more combination. But at the same time, I mean, it could really look like this if he was going completely freeform. And essentially completely freeform is just washing the hair and allowing it to lock up on its own. And like I said, that could be completely true if he chose that route with the way that his hair is looking. But with the separation, all of the dreadlocks are about the same size. I mean, we see one that's pretty thick on top, but other than that, they're all about the same size. So that just leads me to believe that he's been, you know, finger twisting these somehow. And there's more actual evidence of that in some of these later photos. So we'll take a look at a couple of these. Here we see him with Summers, which I did a video on him recently. If you haven't seen it, make sure to go check that video out. The reason I like Summers dreadlocks is because he has very skinny and very thin dreadlocks, and even in this photo we're able to see that some of the dreadlocks in the back of his head are actually a little bit thicker, and that just goes to show that typically on most people the thicker dreadlocks are on the back. And it's not just a coincidence that the thicker dreadlocks typically go on the back. It's more so just because hair on the back of your head is the thickest part. That's why the thicker dreadlocks come out of there. I remember on my first set of dreadlocks, when I was creating the sections, I actually combined sections on the back of my head because I felt that they were too skinny. But turns out that after time, the dreadlocks on the back of my head actually became thicker. So if you're starting out dreadlocks and you seem like the dreadlocks on the back of your head are actually becoming skinny, or they're too thin and the sections are too small, just let them be. And then over time, say they're still too skinny after maybe 6 months or a year, then go ahead and combine them. But typically the hair back there is okay if it is a smaller section than the hair that it's in the front, because it can hold it, because it's stronger, because the hair is thicker back there. But talking about Kankan's dreadlocks, we see that he has quite a bit of dreadlocks, and we'll actually see him have skinny dreadlocks as well, just like Summers, if he keeps up the work. A difference between Summers dreadlocks and Kankan's is not only the hair type, because Kankan has a tighter curl pattern than Summers, but with Kankan's new growth, it makes his dreadlocks appear more of a freeform style. But later on, we do see him actually starting to maintain his dreadlocks all the way down to the roots. And that's what's really going to separate the way his hair looks now from how his hair is going to look in the future if he maintains it all the way down to the root. Because essentially what will happen is his hair will lay down a whole lot better. And if your hair is standing up, then just maintain your dreadlocks all the way down to the root, because typically it's because your new growth is there. If you do have a tight curl pattern just like him, the reason your hair typically wants to stand up is because you have an afro. And if you have an afro under those dreadlocks, it's just going to want to hold itself up all together. And that's typically the number one reason. Another reason why your hair would want to stand up is if your roots are way too tight. Say you do the instant locking method using the crochet hook, which if you want to pick up a Dreadlocks crochet hook, you can pick it up down below. Click the link in the description. But if you're using the crochet hook and you get too close to the root, which isn't a problem, but if you get too close to the root, you will essentially make your dreadlock stand up. And the reason being is because the root is too stiff in order for it to lay down. That's why you want a little bit of new growth. I'll recommend at least ½ an inch of new growth, especially if you're doing the instant locking method. But the number one reason why his hair is actually standing up is because he has a lot of new growth that isn't maintained. I wanted to show this photo because it kind of gives a better description of his hair type, him being a 4B. And not only that, but you're able to see how thin the tips actually are. And this actually is completely fine. It's completely normal. And a lot of people actually end up pulling some of this hair out because it's so thin. And the reason it's so thin is because this is the hair that typically falls out of the scalp, but wants to hang on into the dreadlock. And you want to hang on to that hair because it makes the dreadlock a little bit stronger, and it gives it a little bit more weight. And it makes your hair look a whole lot healthier when you keep all that hair that actually falls off the scalp inside of the dreadlock. That's why you see people with very skinny roots, but the actual length of the dreadlock, the tip of the dreadlock, is actually very thick. The reason being is because all that hair that has actually fallen out of your scalp is actually staying inside of your dreadlock. And I don't want to call it dead hair because it's pretty obvious that all your hair is actually dead. When people say, oh, they killed their hair is dead, they bleached it too much, they lost all their nutrients, which I completely understand. All your nutrients comes from your scalp and actually distributes throughout your hair. But your hair itself, once it grows out, it's not a living organism. So when people say, oh, his hair is dead, or he bleached it too much, like when we see people like Lil Pump And we see people like Lil Uzi Vert and all these people that actually dye and bleach their hair. Like right from jump, once your hair grows out of your scalp, that's it. It's not living anymore. The living part of your hair is actually your scalp. And when the oils are actually developed on your scalp, then it distributes throughout your hair, giving your hair nutrients. It's like putting lotion on a piece of wood. It's like, yeah, that piece of wood grew out of the ground because it grew from a tree. But once the wood was cut down, like pulled out of the scalp essentially, that hair is just hanging out on the dreadlock. We're moving on to the next photo. In this photo, we're actually able to see that he has a high top fade, and it's not very well kept or well maintained, which is completely fine, and I think it goes perfect with his hair. One thing I think would be really cool to see right here though is if you were to get like a really clean fade, nice lineup, just because it would look so cool. He has a very similar hair type to Scar-Lord, and his dreadlocks right here look very similar to how Scar-Lord's looked during the beginning stages. This is a little bit older photo of his hair, and we're able to just see more of that freeform look. Let's go ahead and head on to the next one. Now in this last photo, we're able to see not only the length, but also his hair actually laying down, and they look a little bit more maintained. They look like they have some sort of product in there, and it could be locking gel. It could be actually oils, but overall we're seeing a lot of length. His hair is past his nose, which means that he's been growing his hair for at least, I would say 8 months.